we're going to start off the show with Dylan, somewhere in the United States, pronouns are he, him, who wants to explain why faith is rational. Hey, Dylan, how are you defining faith?
Hey, Matt. Hey, Paul. Thanks for taking some time to chat with me. I would kind of, as far as faith goes, a belief or trust in this context, I guess, specifically in a God or gods of some kind would be my definition for faith. And so I believe that is a rational position to hold.
So,
would you like me to kind of go into that?
Well, I have questions because you just defined faith as a belief, but in my understanding of faith is that it's not the belief. Faith is the justification for the belief.
Okay. Can you maybe flesh that out a little bit more fully, I guess?
Sure.
Or what
Somebody
the difference
believes
the
that
distinctions there?
Sure. Somebody believes that a God exists. They could believe that thing for a number of different reasons. They could have evidence for it, or they could accept this based on faith. Faith is the excuse people give for believing things when they don't have a good reason. Because if you believe something and you have a good reason, you just give the reason. Like when somebody says, hey, how do you know we share common ancestry with other primates? No scientist ever says, oh, we take it on faith or it's justified by faith. Instead, they point to the good reasons, the evidence.
Okay. Well, so I guess where I would go, like, if I were to play LeBron James one-on-one in basketball, I have faith that I would lose very badly. But I don't know for sure.
I don't have faith though, Dylan. I don't need any faith that you would lose badly. I have a reasonable expectation based on evidence comparing LeBron's physical activity accomplishments and record to yours.
Right.
We can calculate this and we can actually we could reasonably put some odds in on just how badly he's going to beat you.
Well, and I am a Lakers fan, so I would hope LeBron would do well. But as far as from a theistic perspective, I would say that what you're describing sounds to me more like a blind faith rather than bridging the gap from evidence to a conclusion would be kind of the distinction that I would approach that with.
So if we're bridging the gap from evidence to a conclusion, isn't that what we do all the time in science, where we're taking evidence and we're building a case and we're making an inference, and yet we don't tend to call that faith?
I mean, I guess when you have the hypothesis before the experiment is done, there would be a sense in which your hypothesis is, I mean, yeah, the word faith isn't necessarily used, but I think you have kind of a probable, if I could say the word, probabilistic sort of approach to it. And then in science, you're usually messaging something or measuring something that is empirical. So you would have a result after it's done.
Isn't it a fact? If a God exists, an actual agent being exists, isn't that a fact that is empirical?
I would say if the God was material, existing within space-time, then in theory, yes. Well, not in theory, I guess. If that was true, that would be the case. But if you were talking about sort of the spaceless, timeless, immaterial sort of being, I think that you wouldn't be able to measure it because it would go beyond the realm of our material existence.
But so if the God, well, this is not about the ontology of what a God is. If a God interacts with reality in a detectable way, then that would produce empirical evidence for that God, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Does the God that you're advocating interact with reality in a detectable way?
Yes.
Cool. So give us the empirical evidence that God is interacting with reality in a way that you've detected.
Well, where I would start with that is the most clear evidence of it would be in the person of Jesus Christ. Of course, that's not in today's world, and you're talking about the sort of archaeology, medical, and of course we got the pesky problem of him taking his body with him after he resurrected. But in
And
today's world, you'd be looking at
peskier
things like
you have a peskier problem, Dylan, which is um, you have no way to demonstrate that he actually existed at all. But even if he did, um, as you're pointing out, if he left and took his body with him, I was asking for empirical evidence. Now, is it possible that there was someone that we identify as Jesus and that he was not, in
Mhm.
fact, divine?
Sure.
Cool. So if that's possible, you just said the clearest empirical evidence for God is in the person of Jesus Christ. And yet you just also acknowledge that it's possible that Jesus wasn't divine. So what's the empirical evidence from Jesus that confirms God?
Yeah, well, I would actually, and this would be a concession I would willingly make, is I would try to move from empirical data into the historical evidence, the reliability of the Gospels, and those sorts of things. I don't
Yeah,
think there's a scientific argument that you could receive.
except that you already agreed that the God you're advocating has given us empirical evidence. And why wouldn't you present empirical evidence? Isn't empirical evidence just de facto better than appealing to historical records?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Cool.
anybody,
So
and of
why
course,
wouldn't we go
yeah.
with the best available evidence? So where's the empirical evidence?
Yeah, and if the best available evidence was, and again, the claims of this would be where we'd have to go into things like um, the data between. I'm sure you have plenty of statistics as far as things like answered prayer and claims to miracles and all this other sort of stuff. But that's not really where I would kind of want to stake my claim in terms of the modern claims. I would really, although I think you could make a case for those, but I'd be more interested in really focusing on who Jesus is in that context. But
I bet you would, but
and
since you've already agreed that empirical evidence exists and it's better, why won't you present the empirical evidence? Why would we want to have a discussion based on weaker evidence and stories about some person's possible character instead of the empirical evidence for God?
yeah, if I was in a position to lay out a variety of peer-reviewed journals on these these claims of miracles and God's interaction in our modern day, like a Caleb Jackson or somebody like that. But that's not my particular area that I would be able to speak to. And so, rather than speak out of ignorance, I would rather. That's just not a place that I'm going to be able to speak particularly strongly to.
So
Yeah,
what
the thing.
convinced
Go ahead.
you? Sorry, what convinced you
No, go ahead.
was stories in a book? Is that essentially like you're saying? All these modern miracles, I don't put much weight on those, and I don't put much weight on other physical evidence. What convinced you, Dylan, was stories in a book? Is that what we're saying?
Well, I mean, I would say this, that I became a believer when I was 19, and so and my knowledge of the Bible, the Gospels, the different epistles of the Apostle Paul, all those other sorts of historical claims that came later, and I would say that that's probably true for a lot of believers. So my
So
belief
then, why did you call into
from.
our show today and pitch
Mhm.
that as the best reason for us to believe, when that is not, in fact, why you came to believe?
Well, really, my concern was more with the topic on the video of is faith rational, and so I was more going to make a case for the rationality of faith. But it sounded like when Matt and I were talking earlier that there was a bit of a difference in regards to our sort of initial definitions, which of course we can have that. But to me, when I think about rationality, it's something that comes based upon reason or logic. And I would argue that faith is rational, even if, and I'm not conceding this, I'm a Christian, but even if I were to concede that there wasn't actually even a God or gods, faith would still be rational because of the numerous benefits to a person's life in the sense of a sense of purpose or direction or joy or those kinds of things. And so faith would be rational on that basis.
Okay, good. I just wanted to get the call back on track, so we'll hand it back to Matt because we were off on a weird Bible tangent. Is faith rational, Matt?
It's going to be difficult to say that faith is rational if we can't agree on a definition of faith.
Dylan, you initially gave a
Yeah,
definition of faith that was very synonymous with just intellectual assent. Like, if you were going to come in
sure.
here and say
Yeah.
that faith is belief, Matt and I both acknowledge that intellectual assent is a rational conclusion at some point. So how would you, what's the difference between straight up intellectual assent and the faith that you want to say is rational?
Yeah, I guess you would go beyond. It would be like saying, if you started with saying that I believe the intellectual assent, I believe Jesus was a person, and you could assent to the claim, I believe that Jesus was the Messiah, that he's God incarnate, and you could even come to those conclusions and still, on the basis of other factors, say, but I refuse, I deny to put my trust or my belief or my submission to this being. And so I think the faith in a religious context, most people, Muslims, Jews, Christians, etc., is when you move beyond a sort of intellectual assent to the reality and into a walking after, a pursuing the things of this God or gods or whatever holy book that a group may ascribe to.
So let me see if I understand this. You're saying that it doesn't matter whether or not there is a God. What matters is putting your confidence in a character because of the potential possible positive benefits to your life, and that this makes it rational to assent to the claim even if it's not true.
No, I would say that it absolutely matters if there's a God, in the sense of to a person's life.
You literally said faith is rational even if there's not a God.
Right, I believe that.
Okay.
But I also believe
And so
that
why is it that when I ask you about that, you go back to telling me that you believe there's God? If faith is rational, whether or not there's a God, I was asking you about your reasons for saying that faith is rational, and my understanding is you were saying it is rational because there are positive benefits to your life irrespective of whether or not there is a God.
Right. Yeah, I was simply defending the rationality of faith of any kind, not
I'm just
necessarily my
asking you if
specific faith
that's
or the faith I
correct.
have.
Wow. All I was doing was asking you if that's a correct summation of what you said.
Yeah, no, I don't. I think if just for defending the rationality, yes.
It's so difficult to get an answer that starts with yeah, no. So if your position is that faith is rational because there are positive benefits to it, whether it's true or not, is that correct?
Yes.
What are the positive benefits of belief that aren't available if, in fact, you disbelieve something that's not true? So, for example, whether there's a God or not, you're saying it is rational to believe, although I think it seems you're arguing it is rational to act as if you believe, because I can't believe something unless I'm convinced that it's true. I can act as if I am convinced, but then I'm just engaged in deception. So what's the positive benefit of believing in, let's say, Christianity that still exists even if Christianity is true? Or sorry, even if Christianity is not true.
Okay, so just to clarify, what are the benefits of acting that way, even if it's not true? Is that Is that the question?
Yes. If Christianity isn't true and you're claiming that acting as if it's true is still beneficial, I want to know what those benefits are.
Yeah, absolutely. I would point to the way that a lot of young people who maybe are struggling in a certain way join the military because they want a sense of structure, perhaps, or that they maybe feel like,
Dylan.
um,
Dylan.
yeah.
I'm asking you what the benefits are to believing in Christianity if, in fact, Christianity is false. What does the military have
Right.
to do with that?
Well, it could be for somebody. And again, I'm speaking as somebody who believes that Christianity is true and that there's so many benefits beyond this.
Jesus fucking
My
Christ. Why you got to make this so difficult? If Christianity is false, what is the benefit to believing that you think makes it rational?
structure, guidance, community, love,
Is there
consistency.
a way to have structure, guidance, and community without believing a lie?
Yes.
Then why would you advocate for believing something that's not true instead of something that is true that gives you structure?
I'm not. I'm simply making
You
the case that
are.
it would be
No,
rational either
Dylan.
way.
No, Dylan, you are. You said that it's rational even if it's not true. And I'm trying to expose that it's a mistake to say that it's rational even if it's not true, because the things that you're pointing to as benefits of the lie of Christianity can be achieved by other lies as well and by things that are true. So given the option to believe between a variety of lies that may provide a delusion-based benefit to a truth that might provide that benefit, why wouldn't we opt for the truth?
You should.
Cool. Demonstrate that it's true, because I don't care if you think it's rational if it's untrue. I only care about whether or not it's true.
Okay. Again, with brevity, again, and I know like this is something Paul could speak to. I just look at the historical record, the reliability of the Gospels, the letters, so on and so forth, the building of the church in the face of Roman persecution and opposition, and so on and so forth. And yeah, I don't mean to. I don't want to hide this portion of it.
Which one of those things?
My personal experience is part of that as well. Yep.
Which one of those things? Which one of those things that you just listed requires Christianity to be true?
I wouldn't say required. I would simply say leads to.
I wouldn't either.
Rationality.
I think all of those things you listed can happen even if Christianity is not true, right?
Sure, that's a possibility.
So those things are not evidence that Christianity is true, right?
No, I disagree. I don't think evidence has to be 100% conclusive.
I didn't say anything about 100%. I said that all those things are possible whether Christianity is true or not, which means those things are not sufficient to determine that Christianity is true.
Not definitively, no.
So what is? That's the thing we care about. So you called in to talk about faith being rational. And then you argued that faith is rational even if it's not true. And personally, I don't give a fuck about whether somebody's opinion is that faith is rational if something's not true. I care about whether or not it's true. And so then we got to, how do you demonstrate that it's true? And you started by listing a bunch of things that cannot demonstrate that Christianity is true. They are insufficient to the task, right?
Again, not 100% definitively, but I think it can lead
You
you
know,
to that conclusion.
your tap dance is really looking incredibly weak. Which of those things, either individually or combined with any of the other things you listed, combine to make a sufficient case for Christianity?
I would argue that the cumulative case, the collective of all of those different things, the things I mentioned, Gospels, historical accounts, the building of the church, et cetera, all of those things would work together to combine things that would, of course, take much longer to nuance and go through and things of that nature. And if you want to dive into any one of those in particular, we of course can dive into some of those things. But
But none of
But
those
I'll
are
kind
what
of
convinced you,
interject that.
right, Dylan? None of those things are what convinced you.
Well, it would be more convincing to stay in the belief, but the initial belief was was prior to me coming to knowledge of those things.
Right. So those things alone, and William Lane Craig would agree. There's lots. I know virtually no apologist that would agree, and no historian that would agree that the historiological things that you just listed there are sufficient to come to faith. That the Holy Spirit absolutely needs to be a part of it, because we do not have any historians who are just pure historians who list those things that you say as a reason why they came to faith. We have a former cop and we have a former reporter, but that's about as close as we get. So so why are you not saying that personal experience and the Holy Spirit are part of the ingredients for the cake that are needed to get there? When that was true for you, you needed the Holy Spirit to get there.
Yeah, well, and that's obvious. That's a theological issue, of course. I recently have come to sort of a shift in my own soteriology as far as that's concerned. But I would argue that, you know, Romans chapter 10, faith comes from hearing of the word of God, and so in Romans 1:16, the gospel is the power of God to those who believe, the Jew first and also the Gentile. So I think there's
so yeah, we're not a Bible verse show, so we'll just. So you called in Dylan with 2 points. You wanted to say that it's rational for people to come to an intellectual assent of a proposition even when they're not 100% certain. That seems like part A. And part B was you're fine with placebos, provided that they have a positive benefit. Those seem to be the two prongs of what you wanted to call in today. Is that correct?
Definitely would affirm point number one. And then point two, I would just push back on the language that I'm personally okay. I would just simply say again, based on the definition of rational, I was simply asserting that a person could rationally, as Matt put it, act as though something was true, even if it wasn't, and still receive benefits like the ones I mentioned previously. But of course, if I'm talking to somebody in an attempt to speak to them about the truth of Christianity, I'm not going to walk away from the conversation going, but hey, even if it's not true, you know, it might not be true, so I don't know. I would obviously try to spend time with that person and work through the things I mentioned, the Gospels, etc.
So was there a point in time where it was rational to believe that the sun orbited the earth?
Rational to believe. I guess if you didn't have evidence, you could rationally think one way or the other. If you didn't know better.
Once upon a time, the available evidence led to a completely rational conclusion that the sun orbited the earth, that it went around the earth.
Yes, I mean, at that time, you don't know what you don't know, so I guess it would be rational to,
which means that rational is independent from whether or not the claim is true.
Agreed. Yep.
Cool. This is why I don't care if you think faith is rational, or if you have an esoteric definition of faith, or you want to say faith is the intellectual assent of something in the absence of confirmation, or however you want to dance around it. The issue here is there a God? And you have acknowledged that you believe there is a God that can and does provide empirical evidence, but you don't want to present empirical evidence. You want to appeal to historical things, which you acknowledge are insufficient to the task. And I'm wondering, if I'm sitting here, you and I are sitting at a bus stop and we've got an hour to kill. What is your case for why I should believe in a God?
That's a great question.
I know I've done this for 20 years.
Yeah, and I know you've spoken with some of the leading names and that kind of thing. So, but yeah, I guess for me, I would start off with sort of a bare theism. You know, nothing doesn't come out of nothing. Something doesn't come out of nothing. So
How do you know?
what's eternal? Is it the universe itself? Well, I would argue that there's no. I mean, nothing is. Well, it's nothing. So there would have to be, at least within our material world.
Does science in any way advocate for something coming from nothing?
Not to my knowledge.
No. So why on earth would that be a starting point? Why would you start by suggesting something that science doesn't say is wrong?
Well, because I'd want to get to the thought of there has always been something, and then the question is, what is that something? Is it our physical universe? Is it maybe a sort of multiversal thing or whatever else? Or is the thing that's eternal actually a mind, an agent, a form? I'm sure you guys are familiar with William Lane Craig's Kalam and that whole sort of
Sure. The problem is that the problem, Dylan, is that the Kalam what's the conclusion of the Kalam cosmological argument?
Oh, you're testing me now. That
it's really easy.
Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause.
Cool. That's it.
Is that right?
Does it tell you? Does the Kalam cosmological argument tell you anything about the cause at all?
Only that it would be uncaused itself.
No. The Kalam does not say that. You just went through almost word for word the Kalam cosmological argument. Everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause for its existence. The Kalam doesn't say anything at all about the nature or ontology of that cause in the slightest. That's all stuff that gets added by other inferences. Now, if we have no ability to investigate the local presentation of our universe earlier than the Planck time, how could we ever say what the cause could be?
Yeah, I think you would be. I think that's going back to something I said earlier. I think you'd be at that jumping off point of having to come to a conclusion based on the presented evidence, and
no,
you'd be taking a leap towards either the deity conclusion or some other materialistic explanation.
Yeah. So here's the. Thank you. This is the damning end of your line of reasoning, because first of all, no, you don't have to make a conclusion. You can say there is insufficient information here, and I'm going to reserve judgment and not take a leap of faith or a leap of irrationality towards a conclusion, because that way is the result of bias. That way is me trying to foster off my ignorance and pretend that I know something. Instead, I will just say, I do not know what the explanation is for the origin of the expansion of our local state of the universe. And all of the people who are asserting that they do know have failed to meet their burden of proof. And some of them are going down a path of magic that is absolutely absurd when you consider the implications. Why is this powerful being that they're hypothesizing, who somehow manages to exist outside of time, which is a logical contradiction? How is that not only reasonable, but how is it that they think this God can present empirical evidence, does present empirical evidence, but we're just not going to waste any time on the actual empirical evidence for God. Instead, we're going to go with some weird inference where when science breaks down in our investigation of the origins of the universe, we'll just make shit up.
So I think you lost me there with the. I'm sorry. Can you just kind of maybe sum up the question part what you want me to respond to in that?
What method do you have to explore the origin of the universe beyond the Planck time?
I don't. I don't have.
Are you reaching a conclusion? Are you reaching a conclusion about that state of affairs before the Planck time?
Yes. Yes.
Why would you reach a conclusion? Why would you reach a conclusion when you admit you have no mechanism with which to investigate the state of affairs?
Well, I want to affirm something you said, that
I'd
it's
like an
not a
answer to that
claim.
question.
I would agree with you. Right. I just want to say that it's not, it's a conclusion. It's not a definitive statement of I was there and I know. The answer to your question would be for me,
Dylan,
that
did I say that your conclusion had anything to do with you being there and knowing?
No,
Did I
not at
say
all.
anything?
No,
Did I say anything remotely like that? Then why did you bring that up? All I've asked is, are you advocating reaching a conclusion about a state of affairs that you also admit you have no method to investigate? Yes or no?
I feel like that question doesn't cover the what I would speak to is
I feel like that's
I
the
believe
biggest dodge I've heard today. It's a yes or no question. You are either
right, but I feel
advocating,
like
you are either advocating for reaching a conclusion about a state of affairs that you admit you don't have any way to explore, or you're not. Which is it? Those are the only two
I,
possibilities. Either you are advocating for reaching a conclusion about a state of affairs that you say you can't investigate, or you are not advocating for reaching a conclusion about a state of affairs that you're going to investigate. That is an exhaustive logical dichotomy.
yeah, if you're talking about me physically investigating, then yes, I'm advocating for that. But I would say there's something that can come to me in the form of revelation from the being who was there prior to that time, who has interacted with people in history, which kind of takes us back to the prior
Wouldn't
claims
that be?
regarding the authenticity of the Bible.
Why wouldn't that count as your mechanism for exploring that? Like, for example, I don't know, I don't necessarily know how the motor in a electric vehicle works. But if I had a friend who was the engineer who designed it, my method for investigating that would be to be able to bring that friend who designed it in to explain it. You're essentially saying that you have the friend who designed it able to reveal stuff to you, while you're simultaneously saying you don't have a way to explore this. Why isn't that mechanism good enough?
No, I think it is. I assumed you meant a materialistic method. I thought, or something more
A real
direct. No, sorry, but no, I just
Okay.
no.
Where's your designer? Where is your designer, and is he going to reveal anything to us the way he's revealed it to you?
To be clear, I'm not advocating for personal divine revelation. Again, I'm speaking to the scripture itself.
What other revelation is there other than personal divine revelation? How do you, revelation is necessarily first person. I mean, Hume raised that centuries ago.
Yeah, no, I just mean, like, I'm not hearing God speak to me in an audible voice saying, Dylan, this is how things happen. But no, but reading the scripture, there's a conclusion being come to. That's the
So
point
once again, we're back to something Paul said, which is you believe a storybook.
Well, I would say I believe historical records and documentation.
What confirmed historical documentation are you pointing to? Because Genesis is not history.
Well, again, I would speak to even if Genesis isn't historical in the sense that we would say, at the very least, it could be a sort of, I forget the title, but the sort of historical record mixed into sort of the cultural story of the time.
You mean mytho-history? Is that the word you were looking for?
Yeah, that's yeah.
How do you tell which verses in Genesis are mythical and which ones are history?
That's a great question, and it's something that I'm not familiar with. So I would have to look into that kind of thing more.
So were the Canaanites the Canaanites had the Enuma Elish, which is virtually the same story, right, as Genesis 1. Did they also have a divine revelation of how the universe was created out of the body of another god?
Well, I would say that differs from the Genesis, like unless I
read the Enuma Elish and then read Genesis 1. They are the same
Can you
stories
point
with
me?
some details swapped.
Yeah, the details swapped is where I would kind of hone in on. I'm not saying
So
there's
that
not
no,
a
but
sense of
so that
synchronicity or whatever.
so you have an answer to Matt's question then. How do you tell which are the real parts and which are the myth parts? How do you tell?
Well, I think what you're asking would get me into a sort of circular reasoning that for the Bible tells me so.
That's not our problem.
Um,
That's your problem.
right? No, but that wouldn't be where I would go. But I can also admit to you that I don't know what in the Hebrew text or what other scholars have kind of gotten to discern for themselves why the parts that they would separate out or which parts would be held in common and that sort of thing.
Well,
But this
here,
is why you
let me
believe.
try.
This is weird.
Let me try kind of a side question here. Would you
Sure.
say that like Neil deGrasse Tyson is an expert on cosmological origins?
I mean, I don't know a lot about him, but that's probably sure. Why not? Like, yeah.
Okay.
Let's
What
go
do you
with
think
yes.
the likelihood is that Neil deGrasse Tyson is going to use the Bible as a history book revealing the origin of the universe?
Based on what I know about him, probably next to none.
Cool. Why is he wrong then?
Well, I don't think it's wrong to have a multiplicity of approaches to come into an answer to a question. And I think to Matt's point
do you think
earlier,
somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson wants to use the best methods for investigating reality? And if so, why is he not willing to use the same methods you are using?
I would guess because he's looking for something like we talked about earlier that would be 100% empirically proven, or as much as that is within the sort of materialistic possibility. And I think because divine revelation, in particular the Bible, would be rejected by so many, he's looking for things that can be peer-reviewed, repeated, and those sorts of things. He would be not in that realm of sort of the historical analysis and that kind of thing.
How about Galileo? Did Galileo use Genesis for any of his discoveries?
I don't
Definitely
know.
a
You'd have to
Christian
tell
guy.
me about that one. Yeah, you'd have to tell me. I'm not overly familiar.
Well, Galileo, I mean, among his things was he discovered that the Earth went around the sun instead of the other way around, if I'm remembering correctly. And a lot of other discoveries. Definitely a Christian man who was persecuted by the church for deigning to say that the Earth was not the center of the universe. He
Right,
discovered a lot of things. Definitely a Christian. Definitely was out there wanting to discover God's thoughts after him. But do you think that he used the book of Genesis for any of these discoveries?
Probably not. But
Should they?
Probably not.
Should they have?
I mean, I don't know that Genesis goes into. I mean, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, but I don't know that it goes into all the cosmological machinations that would have brought those kinds of things about. Like the Bible, Genesis doesn't talk about atoms or molecules or,
Isn't it
those sorts of things.
Isn't it your primary source for reaching the conclusion that God created the universe?
The Bible overall, but not necessarily focused strictly on Genesis. To me,
Cool.
the resurrection.
Where else does the Bible talking about God creating the universe?
Well,
I mean, a little in Job, but it's similar.
Yeah, well, and I think you get a little bit in the New Testament that it talks about God created for whom are all things, and Jesus through whom all things were created. Nothing was created except through him. And so, but to me, the centerpiece would be the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And so if that claim is true,
whoa. You're saying that this, rather than going to Genesis, where it expressly talks about God creating the world in 7 days and going through all the details and putting things down in an order, you think the central confirmation that God created the universe is the New Testament story about Jesus. So a person who you've already acknowledged may not necessarily be divine, for which you have no empirical evidence, for which you have nothing but a story, and you think this is the prime source for concluding that God created the universe?
Well, I think that if you affirm that, then the reliability of the Bible, the things that Jesus affirmed, you would also affirm. Because if somebody pulls
Well,
off
yes,
what he did,
Dylan,
you
congratulations on your tautology. If you believe it, you believe it.
well, yeah,
I used to affirm this stuff too.
right.
And then I understood what good evidence is, what flawed reasoning is, what fallacies are, and why scientists don't go to the Bible to talk about the origin of the universe. They also don't go to the Bhagavad Gita. They don't go to the Scientology, to Dianetics. They don't go to any of these. Do you know why? Because they're insufficient to the task, and yet it is your primary source. Why on earth should anybody take a flawed model based on a storybook over science?
Well, I would say that's a false dichotomy. I think that the Bible would deal with the origin being from a creator, and science would seek to flesh out the machinations through which that creator worked in bringing about.
No. This is the same old tired misrepresentation that science asks how questions and religion asks why questions. No, they're all what questions. And the question is, what is the explanation for the origin of the universe? That's the what question. You're answering it with the explanation for the origin of the universe is God, and your primary source is Jesus. And scientists are looking at this and saying, we don't yet have enough information to say what is the origin of the universe, or even if that question makes sense, because there may not be an origin of the universe, because the universe may have always existed, and all we're looking at is an expansion of that universe, a change in the state of that universe, just like no atoms that became me had to come into existence. Every atom that is a part of my body already existed. It's not like we're inventing new atoms here. And so the scientists are acting in humility and saying, you know what? We don't have sufficient reason to reach a conclusion about an explanation for the origin of the universe, but you are. And when asked how and why you reached the conclusion, your first, well, I won't necessarily say first, one of your lines was, hey, you reach a point where science can't go any further and you have to make a decision. You are wrong there. You do not have to make a decision. That's why science doesn't. And then you went on to be in this, oh, the things that I would point to are all these things that I believe about the Bible, and I think there's empirical evidence for it, but I'm not going to get into that or present that. I'm just going to tell the story. Why would anyone believe the story?
Yeah, well, and again, I want to, like what you talked about of you're right. You don't have to draw a conclusion. You could stay in sort of a, I don't know, and sort of to be comfortable in that space. For me,
it's got nothing
to go to a conclusion.
Yeah, it's got nothing to do with comfort, and it's got nothing to do with choosing. I can't believe anything unless I am convinced that it's actually true. And I'm not going to just accept a just so story without sufficient evidence to warrant it. But isn't it the right answer? Like if I said, Dylan, do you know how the universe began? What's the right answer?
No. The answer is no.
Cool. So if you and I both, when asked, do you know how the universe began, would think that the correct answer is no, why are you advocating for another answer?
Because I believe I have good reason to draw a conclusion. Not a definitive one, not a I know for sure, not a absolutely, but good reason.
Okay. What is your good reason? What is your good reason other than I read a storybook?
Yeah, again, we kind of revisited. I know we draw different conclusions, and actually, I thought it was a good point you made about the Kalam, that technically the cause of the universe could be some other cause, or if I understood you correctly. But I kind of go to, in a very basic way, that based on the complexity, the sort of, I guess you would call it. Again, I'm not super well versed in these names, but like the fine tuning, the sort of design, arguments, all those sorts of things, seem to point to an ordered cause of the universe rather than a arbitrary or loosely constructed reason. And
Hey,
so
Dylan,
that kind of gets you to
To be clear,
Dylan,
Yeah.
arbitrary and loosely defined, that's not the God one, or that is the God one.
Well, I think you'd even say that that's pretty clearly defined, at least
Really?
biblically speaking.
Over 1,000 denominations of Christianity disagree. And then there's all the other proclaimed things. And then there's the God of classical theism, which is just defined loosely as this omni something. But you're sitting here and you're like, well, I got sidetracked there, so I'll just hold off.
I'm sorry, Matt.
No, it's fine. It's not your fault.
Dylan, you quoted John chapter 1. I'm not sure you knew you were quoting John chapter 1, but you quoted John chapter 1, saying, which is the portion of the New Testament that says that Jesus was there in the beginning, right? Now,
Sure.
what
Yeah.
in John chapter 1 did Jesus himself say?
He doesn't speak there. That's John's kind of introduction to the book.
So did Jesus ever claim that he was part of the creation process in the Gospels?
Not maybe in those words per se. You get the John 8:58, before Abraham was, I am. So sort of a pre-existence. John 17, he gives the before the foundation, restore the glory to me, but that we shared before the foundation of the world. So he talks about being there before the foundation of the world.
So I'm just trying to say the justification you're giving it, the Bible is what tells you. Again, you're putting your weight on the commentary about Jesus that happened 80 years after he was gone, not even Jesus himself. Like I just wanted to give you that little bit of homework to go investigate. It sounds like you've done it a little bit. That you're not only just stories. you're now relying on the commentary about stories, even more so.
Can I just ask you to maybe flesh that? When you say commentary on stories, what are you making reference to?
The author of the Gospel of John.
Okay.
The whole intro, the Word became flesh stuff.
Right.
That's not in quotations. He's not saying this is what Jesus said. He's just narrating his version.
Okay.
He's come up with his own theology since the passing of Jesus. They've had at least 50 years for John, something a lot longer, to come up with a theology and their own Christian origin story. What you've got there is a commentary. Not even allegedly Jesus's words. They kind of struck me as weird that you were saying that Jesus was your source. That Jesus was your source, and I just wanted to point out to you that you're actually even if you accept this all at face value, you're a step removed. So that was all. That's a weird side comment.
No, but thank you for trying to clarify that. To me, I would just, and again, we don't need to stay on this. The John 17 passage of Jesus saying before the foundation of the earth implies he was there. And I guess it's not him specifically saying, hey, I created everything, but I think it certainly leans in that direction if he was there before the foundation of the earth. And again, you're talking about, that's granting, and I know you don't maybe grant the face value reliability or even the authorship of the Gospels and those sorts of things.
It's worse than that, because you're looking at John 17, and you, like a lot of other people, seem to have put an emphasis on the fact that Bibles often come in a red letter version, as if what's written there is an accurate representation of what Jesus actually said, and that that what I don't know what that background noise is, but and whether or not it's accurate is independent from whether or not it's true. Now, Dylan, have you ever taken notes in a class in high school, college, whatever?
Probably very brief bullet point notes, but yes.
Yeah, I have too. I don't tend to write
Mhm,
down every word, and it would
mhm,
be a mistake for me to walk out of a classroom or a lecture and take
mhm.
my notes and write down and pretend that I've written down everything that the professor said word for word and that I got it all and understood it all. And it would also be, I mean, it's possible because I could use my phone to record and we have recording devices now, but how
Right.
accurate is someone going to be standing outside in the first century without pen and paper in taking notes on every word that Jesus said?
I mean, it would probably vary based on this time from the event, who's the person, how good's their memory. Obviously, if you factored in the supernatural claims of the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, things of that nature.
Ah,
But
so so
I'm trying to
so
speak
no, no, no,
strictly.
hang on.
Yeah.
It's interesting that in order to try to show that there's good reason to think that it's an accurate representation of what was said, you have to begin and include an assumption that there is some being working to guarantee that it's reliable.
No, I wouldn't say you have to, because again, I think
Okay.
I'm sure there's things that you
So
remember very well from
what
classes or
percentage of
things.
the red letter text, what percentage of the red letter text will ignore translation and we'll just assume that the English translation in ESV, NIV, King James, whatever it is, we'll assume that that's an accurate representation of the actual words that are there. But what
Mhm.
percentage of the red letters in the modern translation of the Bible is an accurate representation of what Jesus said?
I think it would depend on the modern translation, but I would say that because what I would go back to is the sort of original text and then the investigation of textual variants and things like that.
We don't have
But I would
any
say even
originals.
in, well, no, the as far as what is, we have textual variants through the manuscript tradition and things of that nature, and so
But we don't have
that's
any
why the English translation
originals.
thing's a little right, right.
So so
I'm aware. So
we have no originals, and so all I'm asking is, of the red letter text that's attributed to Jesus, how accurate is it, and how can you tell?
yeah, I would say the manuscript tradition and the work of textual critics would give
No,
us
we're
a
talking about how well was the original. Like let's pretend that what we have, Matt. Let's pretend what we have is a Xerox copy of the original. Matt's asking how well was the how can we know that the original was accurate?
I would say up to a, and again, 98%, 99% of the manuscript tradition we can, through textual criticism, get
No,
very
no, no.
close
Not talking
to.
about. You're talking about whether the copies are accurate. We're asking
Oh, I'm sorry.
how
Yeah,
well we can know
help me
that
out.
the
I'm sorry.
original was accurate.
Um, I guess there wouldn't be like a sort of definitive sense. Once you know what the text most likely said in the original, you're simply trying to analyze who wrote it, where were they, how long after the fact, and that would be kind of how you would sort of try to, I guess, work your way to how reliable the original is.
Yeah, yeah. So the question was, how accurate are the red letter things to what Jesus actually said? And the answer is you don't know. Um, but here's the weird thing: you think there's a God, and that this God, through the Holy Spirit, worked to reliably preserve accurately the words of Jesus, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Why why would that God not actively work to preserve the originals so that we don't have this gap and have to rely on textual criticism to try and infer what the originals said? Why would this God who's actively working to preserve the words of Jesus not have had Jesus write down his own words, sign it, and preserve it?
The first question,
Why? Why would that same God not show up today to clarify it? If God is working to preserve this, which is an essential aspect of your model and is the only hope any of you have of claiming any accuracy to what Jesus actually wrote, why
mhm.
is he doing it in the weakest way possible?
Yeah, I mean, we'd be getting into speculation there. I mean, I
I'm not the
don't.
one who believes this shit. Of course it's speculation. I'm calling you out for speculating.
Yeah, I mean, you're comfortable saying I don't know to certain questions. I'm comfortable saying I don't know to certain questions, and so,
But no,
um,
sir, no, sir, no, sir. It's not about saying you're comfortable saying I don't know. You believe something that is in
sure.
absolute contradiction with other things you believe. The natural consequences of a God trying to make sure that Jesus's words are accurately preserved is not making sure that the originals don't exist and that we have copies of translations of copies that all say different things and no way to investigate it. That is not a being that is working to preserve the words. A being that is working to preserve the words would have had Jesus write down his own words, sign it, and preserve those. And if anybody tried to eliminate those, would show up to clarify this so that I don't have to sit here and explain this over and over and over again for 20 years to people who think that just because they read it in a book that other people believed, it's therefore reasonable.
Yeah, I would just say I think you're kind of jumping in terms of your assumption of God's intentions, motives, or
I didn't
the
assume God's
method with
intentions,
which he tried
Dylan.
to do that.
I asked you if you were reliant on God's intention to preserve the words Jesus, and you said yes.
Right, right. But the whole concept of, if so, he would then make sure that, the original copy was still around, and he'd come back and clarify and all that other sort of stuff.
Why wouldn't
Um,
he do that?
but
Wouldn't you do that
that's
if it was
really
important? Wouldn't you do that if you were God?
it really depends on what my intentions are. I'm not God, thankfully, but
No, it depends on the
it depends
intentions.
on the
Correct,
intentions and
Dylan.
motives.
And you already acknowledged that God's intention is to accurately preserve the words of Jesus, right?
Sure.
If God's intention is to accurately preserve the words of Jesus, why is he not using the most reliable methods to preserve that word?
I guess I would ask what is the most reliably
I just
um,
told you
the reliable
that the
method?
most reliable method is to have Jesus write down those words, sign it, and then establish a chain of custody of the original from the moment that happened until now. Can God do that?
Sure. It's
Then
interesting
why
actually that
doesn't he?
I actually would, because that actually sounds a lot like, and I'm not, please don't, I don't mean any sort of like calling out on this, but just because that sounds like a controlled transmission of the text, very similar to the sort of case that Muslims make in regards to the Quran. I actually like the New Testament's free transmission, the multiple scribes. We end up with textual variants, but I like the multiplicity of authors and sort of the rapid spreading and
That's because you're
of centuries.
rationalizing. That's because you're rationalizing, Dylan. And you have sitting here, you cannot acknowledge that there's a better way and then say, I like the fact that God didn't take the better way. I like the fact that we have copies of translations of copies. I like the fact that there's absolute confusion about what the originals said and how reliable it is. We have no way to investigate it. I don't really think those Muslims that are advocating a strong chain of evidence are anywhere near on as strong a footing as we are. That's absolute bullshit. I mean, There's just no other way to describe that. There are methods that are reliable and methods that are not. And you think simultaneously, you hold in your head that God wants to be reliable, but God failed to be reliable. And then you rationalize it as better in your head while admitting that it's not better.
Yeah, I would argue if there was such a controlled transmission, like a signed by Jesus, all that sort of stuff,
Here it comes.
I think there would still be claims to the church manipulating or behind closed doors
Yes.
altering or editing. Where if
We
the
got there,
transmission doesn't-
ladies and gentlemen. We got there. That even if God, in his infinite power and wisdom, used the most reliable ways, it would be a waste of his time because those pesky atheists would still just not believe it. We're done, Dylan. We're gonna go on to other callers because you just walked yourself into the I'm going to put up a denial block at all costs, because God himself could walk in here today and hand Matt the handwritten copy from Jesus and affirm it, but Matt would still just be too fucking stubborn. And that's why God doesn't use the best methods, because the best methods wouldn't matter anyway. That's the most gross, ridiculous rationalization that turns your entire foundation into a cartoon. But thanks.
All right. Well, yeah. Thank you guys for your time.
See ya.
I knew we would get there. It is every time we'd start talking about, hey, can you present actual evidence for this? Eventually, and some get there much quicker, eventually somebody goes, why would God bother giving you evidence? You just won't believe it anyway. And that is that is an entire bottle of copium that Dylan just swallowed. Because the reality is, I'll believe anything for which there's sufficient evidence. And if in fact there is a God who has sufficient evidence and is capable of presenting sufficient evidence to me, it has not happened. And now they have to explain why. And it's because God knows that I just wouldn't believe it, despite the fact that I used to believe exactly what they believe for the same silly reasons they do. So they think that I used to believe for bad reasons, but God won't give me good reasons because I still won't believe. And yet, one of the best things that a God could do is, not to, blow myself, but I have content that hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people have seen. And the best thing God could do is show up and present that good evidence so that they could prove to everybody, see, I told you, here's the amazing, undeniable evidence. And Matt and these other atheists still won't accept it. And yet that doesn't explain why God doesn't do it for all the other people who would honestly accept if there was good evidence. They twist themselves into knots, trying to avoid the obvious fact that if prayer worked, it wouldn't be allowed in casinos. If God existed, you wouldn't have to argue about it. If the Bible were reliable, there would be no way for any reasonable person to not accept it. If in fact there was a God, spectral evidence would be allowed in a court of law. If in fact the Bible was history, and if the Bible was scientifically reliable, astrophysicists would have been using it to confirm aspects of Genesis from the moment it was written. Instead, it's about a bunch of sheep herders who want to take multiple wives, slaughter the people who don't agree with them, tell stories about how wonderful and great they are, despite not being able to defeat chariots of iron with a god, and then do some kind of tap dance about how we have a reliable account of God coming down, impregnating someone, so that he can incarnate himself as a version of himself to act as a sacrifice, to serve as a loophole for rules that he's in charge of. But I'm the one that's a stubborn cynic who just won't accept that good evidence from God. It's wild. Hey, Paul, you want to learn how to experience God?
I that's all I want.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jimmy Snow. I'm the executive producer of The Line. And at night, I sneak into Matt Dillahunty's house and I trade his cereals for other cereals. He comes out and he's like, wait, these are cereals I buy, but I swear I had different cereals. Anyway, would you like to support this channel or any specific show? You can do so over on Patreon or in channel memberships. There are special tiers for special shows or for the channel at large, and it helps us expand programming as well as hopefully very soon launch it in podcast form. Now, also, if you'd like to support, you can like, you can subscribe, you can leave a comment or a super thanks, which is a special highlighted comment that you pay for. Those are fun. And, screw the algorithm, go check out something over here, I suppose. Boy, I hope I can still put those icons there, because if I can't, this is going to look really stupid. I'm going to go buy some Cocoa Puffs and switch out Matt's mini wheats now.